Fanfic Corner, presented by Jennifer. Shrapnel. The Bad Batch had once again been in a confrontation with Crosshair, and were now trying to find a way to distract or find an opening to escape. They were outnumbered by the squad Crosshair had brought with him. It was 15 to 5. They were unfortunately backed into a room, crouched behind some Imperial crates. There was only one exit, and of course, it was blocked. "We need a plan," Echo said through his gritted teeth. Echo had told Hunter that it wasn't a good idea to come and take this mission because he knew it would be risky with the Imperial presence. And the chances of running into Crosshair, like they just did, was very high. "What if we just mow him down and take them head on?" Wrecker pushed his hand and fists together. "That would be irrational," Tech said, inclining his finger to Wrecker. Echo just face-palmed and rolled his eyes, just being overall annoyed with the whole situation. Omega just looked back and forth between Wrecker and Tech as they argued away at each other. Hunter was silently forming a plan and blocking out the background noises. He held his hand on his chin, but was snapped out of his thoughts as he heard Crosshair's voice. "Might as well give up and come out from where you're hiding, Hunter. There's only one way out, and my troops are blocking it." Crosshair moved around the quite large room, treading back and forth. Hunter stuck his head up to get a quick glimpse of Crosshair to see that his back was facing the Batch as he searched for them. He ducked back down, trying to avoid detection from the other Imperial troops searching the area as well. The Batch all turned their attention to Hunter, awaiting the plan. "I'll make a distraction to catch Crosshair's attention and draw the others' attentions as well. Wrecker and Tech, go to the other part of the room out of sight, and on my signal, lay cover fire. You still have those thermal detonators, right?" "Yes," Tech said with a nod of his head. "Echo, you will sneak out of sight with Omega and lay the charges throughout the room and fire as necessary." Omega gave a nod with the most serious face. And then when they're set to detonate them, that will be our opening to flee. Everybody understand?" They all nodded at Hunter. "But what will you do?" Omega looked up at Hunter with her big doe eyes. "Me and Crosshair are going to have a little one-on-one." Hunter cracked his neck from side to side. Hunter turned around, still crouching out of sight. Omega and Echo went on their way to set the charges. Hunter took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He stood up and presented himself in the opening in Immediately, all blasters were pointed at him. Hunter put his hands up to show he wasn't holding his own blaster. He was staring at Crosshair, and Crosshair only. Hunter could feel the smirk on Crosshair's face, even if it was covered up by his helmet. "Go back to searching for the others. They're around here somewhere," Crosshair ordered his men, looking back to Hunter. "So, you show yourself in humility, further exposing your cowardice." "The only coward here is you, Crosshair. I hardly see the courage in one that can't take his own battle on by himself, but further provokes his brotherhood by betraying them. You talk about betrayal as if you haven't done it to your own brother." Hunter could almost hear the hurt in Crosshair's voice. "I hardly see courage in leaving your brother behind. You shot first. You created your own divide from this team. You chose to betray us." Hunter wanted to just yell at Crosshair as loud as he could and knock some sense into him. But he knew that wouldn't help. "You chose to leave us behind. You left me with no other choice, just like you're giving me now." Crosshair drew his gun back up, pointing at Hunter. "And this time, there won't be any more accusations." Hunter stared down the barrel of Crosshair's sniper rifle. As he was about to signal for Tech and Wrecker, a guard had pulled Omega out from behind a box. The guard had her by her shirt and dragged her out into the open. Found the one you were looking for, Commander," the guard said as Omega squirmed in his grasp. Hunter's face hardened, and his attention was focused on Omega now. He gave the signal to Wrecker and Tech. They popped out from behind some containers and started shooting at the other guards. Hunter took it as his chance to jump over the crate he was behind and advance forward, tackling Crosshair. The trooper that was holding Omega's attention was drawn to the blaster fire from the Bad Batch. She bit down on the trooper's hand, forcing him to let her go. Omega fell to the ground on all fours and quickly gathered herself. She took the detonator from her pocket and set off the charges. The charges exploded, and Omega was thrown to the side and knocked out from the force of the explosion. She was slowly getting up when she felt the hands of someone assisting her up. "You okay, kid?" Echo was almost yelling. Omega's ears were ringing, so she couldn't hear him very well, but had made out what he was saying. "Yeah, I'm good." "Hunter, we have to leave," Echo yelled across the room as charges were still going off. Hunter was on top of Crosshair with his vibroblade to his neck. "You're lucky I don't just slit your throat right here and leave you for dead. Next time you even look at the kid, you won't be so lucky." Hunter punched Crosshair in the face, knocking him out, and ran out with the rest of the Bad Batch back to the ship. "You took quite a fall, Miss Omega," Tech said as he put a Band-Aid over the scrape on her knee. "I'm fine, just a little dizzy." Omega put a hand to her head to stop the room from spinning. "Those are normal side effects from the explosion." He got up from his knees and looked down at Omega in the chair. "I suggest you get some rest." Omega nodded at Tech. She didn't feel very well. When she stood up, she almost fell over, but caught herself before making contact with the floor. Omega felt nauseous as she walked to her room, and her body ached from when she hit the floor. "Maybe if I get some rest, it'll go away," she thought. The Bad Batch had made it back to Sid's after they had given the results of the last mission to Sid. They all went to get drinks at the bar. As usual, the Bad Batch were the only people in the cantina. They all gathered around and poured their drinks. After getting settled in their desired seats, the conversation started about what they had gone through on the mission. Omega was still behind the bar, finding something for her to drink. She was trying to focus on the conversation of the batch, but found her focus being drawn somewhere else, as there was a slight sharp pain in her side. But it went away as quickly as it arrived. Omega poured her drink, walking from behind the bar. She walked down to the other end, feeling dizzy from the movement and lightheaded. She was almost to her seat again when she was struck with another sharp pain in her side. This time, she brought a hand to her side, hoping to soothe the pain. Instead, she felt something wet. She was turned away from the batch as they were still talking with one another. She looked down at her hand and saw blood covering it all over. She looked down at her clothes, seeing her whole side was almost covered in blood. Omega started to get dizzy and was nauseous again. She turned around and stood in place, trying to focus enough to find Tech. Omega moved to put her cup on the table, but was too dizzy. She reached her arm out with her cup, and as soon as she went to place her cup, she completely missed the bar top. She stumbled forward, trying to catch herself, but the momentum was too great. Omega fell to the ground first, shattering the glass, then hitting her head on the ground hard, knocking her out cold. The glass shattering on the ground caught the batch's attention. They all stopped the conversation to see what had happened. Hunter's eyes immediately landed on Omega, face down on the ground. She wasn't moving. He jumped up out of his chair, running over to Omega. He slid down on the ground next to her. Omega? Hunter placed a hand on her back, slightly shaking her, but there was no response. Come on, kid, Hunter mumbled under his breath as he flipped her over. By this time, the rest of the batch had gathered around the two of them. Hunter saw that Omega's eyes were closed and her chest was moving up and down a little more rapidly than usual. He smelled a familiar metallic scent, and his eyes were diverted to the blood that was pooling on her side. Hunter immediately applied pressure to the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, as Tech found what he could to help stop the progression of the wound until they got back to the ship. Hunter was washing the blood from his hands in the refresher. He looked down as the water slowly turned red. Tech had just finished pulling out a piece of shrapnel from Omega's side. He had said it was from one of the detonators they had placed. Hunter wiped his hands and sighed. How could he have just brushed off the way she felt after the explosion for just side effects without checking her more thoroughly for injuries? He had got so caught up in his confrontation with Crosshair, he had forgotten to take a look at her for himself. He walked out of the refresher. They had laid Omega out on one of the bunks so they could keep an eye on her. Tech had said that she had lost a lot of blood and would be out for a while, if not a day or two. But the question kept nagging at Hunter was, why didn't she tell one of them? Hunter was sitting by Omega's side. She hadn't woken up for about a day and a half. Hunter hadn't left since. He was currently fixing Omega's covers that she had thrown off when she had moved in her sleep. Hunter covered up the poor girl that was shaking from the chills on her skin and soon relaxed in the warmth of the blankets. Hunter sat back in his chair, letting out a tired sigh. He had barely slept the whole time. He rested his elbow on the arms of the chair, putting his head in his hands. He was slowly starting to doze off. He heard heavy footsteps in the distance, but his eyes were heavier. He soon felt a soft, warm texture of a blanket resting on his body. The chair slowly reclined, and Hunter was soon laying on his back and instantly falling asleep. Hunter slowly blinked his eyes open, making them come into focus. He turned to his side to see that Omega was no longer in the bunk. He slightly panicked for a moment and almost jumped out of his chair, but was assured by the Tuca doll he realized he was holding in his hand. Hunter smiled to himself that Omega had left him the doll as a form of comfort. He got up out of the chair and went straight to Omega's room, hoping to find her there, which he did. Hunter noticed that her curtain was open, making it welcome for him to just climb up and walk in. "You okay, kid?" Hunter said from behind Omega. She quickly turned her head back and smiled when she saw Hunter. "I'm okay." It was quiet for a moment, and then Omega spoke again. "I didn't want to wake you up. You looked so comfortable." She smiled up at Hunter once more as he was now at her side. "Thank you, Omega." Hunter returned the smile, looking back down at her and ruffling Omega's hair. Some time had passed, and more questions were answered, but one still nagged at his mind that he hadn't asked yet. Hunter was now sitting down next to Omega on the ground. "Why didn't you tell us you had gotten hit with a piece of shrapnel?" Omega looked up at Hunter. "I didn't know. I didn't feel it until I was at Sid's. Tex said I probably didn't feel it because my adrenaline rush hadn't worn off yet." Hunter was relieved to hear those words coming out of her mouth, and not that she was scared to tell any of them, that they had some form of established trust. "I thought it was just a side effect from the explosion, but by the time I realized it wasn't, it was too late," Omega explained further. Omega looked Hunter in the eyes. "I tried to warn you or Tech, but I fell before I could." "Omega, it's not your fault." Hunter pulled her into his side. "Me and Tech should have looked out